General Park Tay stood in the war room at Earth Defense Command, studying a massive holographic map that showed every known Velkhari military installation across their empire. Red markers indicated targets scheduled for immediate destruction, while yellow markers showed facilities that would be captured to gather intelligence about enemy operations. The human military machine had transformed from a peaceful exploration force into an efficient engine of war. Admiral Cho Min received new orders from Earth Command to begin systematic elimination of all Velkhari military capabilities in the sector. Her fleet would work methodically through the target list, ensuring that no enemy stronghold survived the campaign. The Velkhari had made the mistake of attacking innocent civilians, and now they would face the full consequences of awakening humanity's military might. The Velkhari Empire tried desperately to negotiate for peace, as reports of military disasters flooded their communication networks. Ambassador Veltar was sent to neutral space, carrying offers of tribute and promises that Velkhari forces would never again enter human territory. The alien diplomat hoped to find some way to stop the devastating attacks that were destroying his civilization. Ambassador Imdana met with the Velkhari representative on a neutral trading station, but her expression remained cold as she listened to the desperate pleas for mercy. The human diplomat had seen the footage from New Sol Colony and remembered the burned homes and murdered children. Her response was clear and final. There would be no negotiations until every human prisoner was returned alive and healthy. Every resource stolen from New Sol Colony would be paid back with interest, calculated at wartime rates. The entire Velkhari leadership would surrender to face trial for war crimes against civilian populations. Only after these conditions were met would humanity consider discussing terms for peace. The Velkhari ambassador realized that his mission had failed completely. The humans were not interested in tribute or promises, but demanded justice for the attack on their farming colony. Ambassador Veltar returned to Velkhari space knowing that his empire faced total destruction because their leaders had chosen to attack innocent families instead of negotiating peaceful contact. Lieutenant Commander Seo Jong specialized in rescue operations behind enemy lines and had been given the most dangerous mission of the war. His team would infiltrate Velkhari slave camps throughout the empire to free human prisoners and gather intelligence about enemy operations. The lieutenant commander had volunteered for the assignment because he could not bear the thought of his people suffering in alien prisons. The first rescue mission took place at a mining facility on the planet Velkros, where Velkhari overseers forced captured humans to work in dangerous conditions without proper safety equipment. Lieutenant Commander Seo Jong and his team approached the facility using stealth technology that made their ship invisible to enemy sensors. The human rescue team moved through the mining complex like ghosts, eliminating guards silently and efficiently. The Velkhari had not expected any rescue attempt, and their security was focused on keeping prisoners inside rather than keeping attackers out. Within 2 hours, every human captive had been freed and transported to safety. Park Min was among the rescued prisoners, and she wept with joy when she saw human soldiers coming to save her family. The woman had been separated from her son Park Jun during the attack on New Sol Colony, and feared she would never see him again. Lieutenant Commander Seo Jong assured her that other rescue teams were searching every Velkhari facility until all human prisoners were found. The intelligence gathered from each rescue mission provided detailed information about Velkhari military operations and revealed the locations of other slave camps throughout their empire. The rescued prisoners also provided testimony about the systematic cruelty they had witnessed, confirming that the Velkhari deserved no mercy for their crimes against innocent people. Captain Park Yun commanded the stealth destroyer Soul's Vengeance, which had been designed specifically for hunting enemy supply ships in hostile territory. Her vessel could remain completely invisible while moving through Velkhari space and could strike targets without warning before disappearing again. The captain had studied Velkhari trade routes and identified the most vulnerable supply convoys. The first convoy attack happened near the Velmaran system, where Velkhari merchants were transporting weapons and supplies to military outposts. The Soul's Vengeance appeared from nowhere and destroyed 6 cargo ships within minutes before vanishing back into space, leaving only wreckage and confused escort vessels that had never seen their attacker Velkhari. Merchants began refusing to travel without massive military escorts after supply convoys started disappearing throughout their empire. The cost of protecting every shipment was crippling their economy and making it impossible to maintain their military forces. Captain Park Yoon smiled as she read intelligence reports showing that Velkari trade had dropped by 70%. The psychological warfare was as effective as the direct military attacks. Velkari soldiers who had once terrorized weaker species now lived in constant fear of human retaliation. Every shadow might hide a human infiltrator. Every ship on their sensors might be a human warship preparing to attack. Their empire built on intimidation was crumbling as word spread that the humans were unstoppable. Major Kim Tae led a commando team that specialized in destroying Velkari weapons factories and shipyards. The humans had developed new explosive devices that could penetrate any known armor and destroy entire facilities. From the inside, Major Kim Tae's team had successfully eliminated 12 major production centers without losing a single soldier. The Velkari tried to hide their most important facilities in secret locations, but human intelligence networks had identified every military installation in their empire. Spy satellites monitored Velkari communications, while deep cover agents provided real-time information about enemy movements and defensive preparations. Colonel Yoon Hwa commanded the 3rd Assault Regiment, which was responsible for capturing Velkari command centers and military headquarters. The colonel's troops used advanced armor and weapons that made them nearly invulnerable to enemy fire, while their training allowed them to overcome any defensive position. The attack on Velkari High Command Outpost Gamma took place during the night cycle when most of the enemy garrison was sleeping. Colonel Yoon Hwa's soldiers moved through the facility like silent death, eliminating guards and capturing officers who might have valuable intelligence about remaining Velkari forces fleet. Admiral Vorthik was captured during the raid and brought before human interrogators who wanted information about Velkari military capabilities and the locations of remaining human prisoners. The alien commander who had ordered the attack on New Seoul Colony now faced justice for his crimes against innocent civilians. Species throughout the galaxy watched in amazement as the mighty Velkari empire collapsed under human assault. Civilizations that had suffered under Velkari rule for generations began to rebel, sensing that their oppressors were finally vulnerable. The psychological impact of humanity's campaign was spreading far beyond the original conflict. The Velkari government sent increasingly desperate messages to their military commanders ordering them to find some way to stop the human attacks, but every response brought news of more defeats and destroyed installations. The empire that had seemed invincible was being systematically dismantled by enemies they had dismissed as harmless farmers. Admiral Song Jae reviewed the latest battle reports and realized that the war was nearly over. The Velkari military had been reduced to scattered remnants hiding in remote locations while their government prepared for the final human assault on their homeworld. The dragons had awakened, and nothing could stop them now. Admiral Song Jae stood on the bridge of his flagship as the massive human fleet entered orbit around Velkara, the homeworld of the Velkari Empire. Below them lay the capital city of a civilization that had terrorized the galaxy for centuries but was now reduced to begging for mercy. The final phase of humanity's campaign had begun, and the Velkari leadership waited in their deepest bunkers, knowing that their empire's fate would be decided within hours. The orbital bombardment platforms that surrounded Velkara had been destroyed weeks earlier by Captain Park Yoon's stealth operations, leaving the planet completely defenseless against the approaching human armada. Every Velkari military installation in their empire had been eliminated, captured or abandoned as their forces scattered in panic across the galaxy. President Nam Yuri transmitted the final ultimatum on all frequencies so that every Velkari on their homeworld could hear humanity's demands. The message was simple and gave the aliens exactly 1 hour to make their choice. Unconditional surrender with full acceptance of human terms or complete annihilation of their civilization. The terms were harsh but fair, considering what the Velkari had done to innocent human. Families, all surviving human prisoners, would be returned immediately and in perfect health. Every resource stolen from New Seoul Colony would be repaid with additional compensation for the suffering caused. The entire Velkari government would surrender to face trial for war crimes. Velkhari military forces would be permanently disbanded with strict limits placed on any future weapons development. The Empire would pay reparations to every species they had enslaved over the centuries and would submit to human oversight of their government until they proved they could behave peacefully. In the deepest bunker beneath the Velkhari capital, Supreme Leader Morvok gathered his remaining advisors to discuss their impossible situation. The reports from across their empire painted a picture of total military collapse with human forces controlling every strategic location and asset that had once made the Velkhari powerful. Defense Minister Kultan argued for a final desperate battle, believing that dying in combat was better than surrendering to the species they had dismissed as weak farmers. But Intelligence Chief Vexmore presented evidence that human forces outnumbered and outgunned the remaining Velkhari defenders by ratios that made resistance completely hopeless. The Velkhari leadership watched through spy satellites as more human ships continued arriving in their home system. The enemy fleet was large enough to destroy every city on their planet within minutes if they chose to do so. Supreme Leader Morvok realized that his species faced extinction unless they accepted the human demands. Fleet Admiral Vorthok was brought from his prison cell to the communication center, where he would deliver the surrender message. The once proud military commander who had ordered the attack on New Sol Colony now wore prisoner chains and could barely look at the camera as he prepared to announce his empire's defeat. Commander Thexel stood beside his former superior, also in chains, waiting to face justice for his role in the massacre of innocent civilians. The officer who had led the attack on the peaceful farming colony would spend the rest of his life paying for the terrible mistake of underestimating human resolve. The surrender broadcast went out across the galaxy as Fleet Admiral Vorthok announced that the Velkhari Empire was laying down its weapons and accepting all human demands unconditionally. The message was heard by billions of beings throughout known space, including many species that had suffered under Velkhari oppression for generations. Major Choi Mira stood on the observation deck of the Inchen's Fury, watching Velkhari ships surrender in orbit around their homeworld. The defense coordinator, who had survived the New Sol Colony massacre, had become a symbol of human resilience, and her presence at the final victory was deeply meaningful to every soldier in the fleet. The Major thought about Park Jun and the other children who had died in the attack and felt a mixture of sadness and satisfaction, knowing that their deaths had been avenged. The peaceful colony would be rebuilt stronger than before, but the innocent lives lost could never be replaced. Lieutenant Commander Seo Jong supervised the final prisoner exchange as the last human captives were returned from Velkhari custody. Every rescued person was given medical attention and counseling to help them recover from their ordeal. Park Min was reunited with her son Park Jun, who had survived by hiding in the underground tunnels during the attack. The reunion between mother and child brought tears to the eyes of hardened soldiers who had fought through the entire campaign. Seeing families brought back together reminded everyone why they had fought so hard to bring justice to those who attacked innocent people. Dr. Kang soon arrived on Velkhara with a team of scientists to study Velkhari technology and ensure that they could never again threaten peaceful species. The xenobiologist who had identified the attackers would now oversee the dismantling of their military-industrial complex. Captain Quan Yeon led the security forces that arrested Velkhari war criminals and transported them to human custody for trial. The Marine officer who had boarded enemy ships during the campaign would now ensure that those responsible for atrocities faced justice. The psychological impact of humanity's victory spread throughout the galaxy as news of the Velkhari defeat reached. Every inhabited system species that had lived in fear of the alien raiders celebrated their liberation, while others reconsidered their assumptions about human military capabilities. Civilizations that had dismissed humans as weak farmers now understood that humanity's peaceful nature was a choice, not a weakness. When that choice was taken away by attacks on innocent civilians, the dragons awakened and became something far more dangerous than any traditional military empire. The rebuilding of New Sol Colony began immediately with advanced technology and stronger defenses, but the memorial garden at the center of the settlement ensured that the victims would never be forgotten. Their sacrifice had revealed the true strength of human civilization and served as an eternal warning. Admiral Cho Min addressed her fleet as they prepared to return to human space, knowing that their mission was complete. The Seventh Fleet had proven that humanity would go to any lengths to protect their people and would never allow attacks on civilians to go unpunished. The war crimes trials would take years to complete as thousands of Velkhari officers faced justice for their actions against innocent populations throughout the galaxy. The legal proceedings would establish precedents for how civilized species should respond to those who targeted non-combatants. Colonel Osung and his orbital assault troops returned home as heroes, having demonstrated that human soldiers were among the finest warriors in the galaxy. Their training and dedication had turned the tide of battle and brought swift justice to those who had committed atrocities. The galaxy would never forget the lesson learned from the Velkhari War, that attacking human civilians was the most dangerous mistake any species could make. The dragons had awakened and shown their true power, ensuring that peaceful farmers could sleep safely, knowing they were protected by forces that no enemy could overcome. Captain Lee Hyun walked slowly across the metal floor of the observation deck. His boots made soft clicking sounds as he moved toward the large glass window that showed the beautiful view outside. Two bright suns were setting in the orange and purple sky above New Sol Colony. The warm light painted everything in golden colors that made the farming settlement look peaceful and safe. 20 years had passed since the first human ships arrived at this distant planet. 20 years of hard work turning empty land into a home for families who wanted a better life than the crowded cities back on Earth. The colonists had built their houses from local stone and metal, brought from the supply ships that came every few months. Children played in the community gardens while their parents worked in the big farming fields that stretched beyond the Horizon Park. June was only 8 years old, but he already knew every corner of the colony. He ran between the vegetable gardens chasing the small flying creatures that looked like butterflies but had 6 wings instead of 4. His mother Park Min called to him from their house telling him to come inside for dinner. But June wanted to catch one more butterfly before the suns went down completely. The boy had never seen anything scary in his whole life and thought the colony was the most wonderful place in the universe. Farmer Kim Dae wiped sweat from his face as he finished checking the grain storage buildings. The harvest this season had been the best ever, and the warehouses were full of food that would feed the colony through the winter months ahead. Kim Dae had moved here from Earth when June was just a baby, hoping to give his family space to grow and clean air to breathe. The farming was hard work, but seeing his crops grow tall and healthy made him proud every single day. Major Choi Mira sat in the colony defense office looking at reports that showed everything was normal and safe. Her job was to watch for any threats that might come from space, but in 20 years nothing dangerous had ever happened. The biggest problems she dealt with were broken fence posts and wild animals getting into the crop fields. Sometimes she joked with the other colonists that her position was the easiest job in the whole galaxy, because there was never anything to defend against. The communication center buzzed quietly with routine messages from other human colonies, and the occasional supply ship checking an engineer. Yunhana monitored the systems that kept the colony running smoothly. The power generators hummed steadily, providing electricity to every building. The water purification plants worked perfectly, turning the planet's natural water into something safe for humans to drink. Life support systems showed green lights across every monitor, meaning everyone could breathe easily and live comfortably. Medic Bae Kyung organized medical supplies in the small clinic that served the whole colony. Most of his work involved treating minor injuries from farming accidents or helping with the births of new babies. The colony had grown from 200 original settlers to over 800 people, including many children who had been born on this world and called it home. Bae Kyung kept detailed health records showing that the colonists were actually healthier than people living on Earth because of the clean environment and fresh food. The Velkhari fleet moved through the darkness of space, like silver sharks hunting for prey. Commander Thexel studied the intelligence reports about the human settlement on the planet below. His scouts had been watching the colony for months, taking pictures and recording everything they could see. The humans appeared to be simple farmers with no military weapons or defense systems that could threaten even a single Velkhari fighter ship. Commander Thexel believed that conquering the human colony would be as easy as taking candy from a child. His species had built their empire by attacking weaker civilizations and turning the survivors into slaves. The Velkari military was famous across the galaxy for their quick, brutal attacks that left no time for their enemies to organize any resistance. Every species they had encountered either surrendered immediately or was destroyed completely within hours. The Velkari intelligence reports showed families working in fields and children playing games instead of soldiers training for battle. There were no weapon factories or military bases, just farming equipment and civilian buildings scattered across the settlement. The humans seemed to spend their time growing food and raising children rather than preparing for war, which made them perfect targets for Velkari expansion plans. Fleet Admiral Vorthak had ordered Commander Thexel to capture the colony quickly and quietly, without alerting other human settlements in nearby star systems. The plan was to take prisoners who could work as slaves in Velkari mining operations while destroying everything else as a warning message. Any species that saw what happened to the humans would understand that resistance against the Velkari Empire was completely hopeless. Commander Thexel positioned his ships in attack formation around the planet as the two suns began to rise on what would be the last peaceful morning in New Sol colony history. His weapons officers reported that all systems were ready to fire. The Velkari fighters launched from their carrier ships and moved toward the atmosphere like a swarm of deadly insects preparing to sting their unsuspecting victims below. Captain Lee Hyun woke up early as he did every morning and walked to the observation deck to watch the sunrise over his peaceful colony. He had no idea that alien ships were already in orbit above him, or that his people had only minutes left before their quiet lives would be shattered forever. The captain looked out at the farming fields where Day would soon begin another day of honest work, and the houses where families like Park Jun's were still sleeping safely in their beds. The emergency beacon hidden deep beneath the colony's administration building was connected to every human settlement across the galaxy, but it had never been activated because there had never been any real danger. The beacon was designed to send an automatic distress signal the moment any hostile action was detected, but Captain Lee Hyun hoped it would never be needed because that would mean something terrible had happened to his people. Major Choi Mira arrived at her office just as the first Velkari energy beams struck the administration building above the emergency beacon. The peaceful morning exploded into fire and smoke as alien weapons turned the symbol of human civilization on this world into burning rubble within seconds. The beacon activated automatically, sending its cry for help racing through space toward distant human worlds that had no idea their peaceful farmers were under attack. The war between humans and Velkari had begun, but only one side knew it yet. Admiral Song-jae was drinking his morning coffee and reading routine patrol reports when the emergency alarm started screaming through Earth Defense Command. The sound was so loud and urgent that he dropped his cup and hot coffee spilled across his desk. He had not heard that particular alarm in over 30 years because it only activated when human civilians were under direct attack somewhere in the galaxy. The main display screen flickered to life, showing a red warning message that made Admiral Song-jae's blood turn cold. Emergency beacon activated from New Sol colony. All communication lost. Hostile forces detected, colony status unknown. The automated distress signal had traveled across hundreds of light years in just minutes, using quantum communication technology that connected every human settlement to Earth. Defense Command, Lieutenant Park Soo ran into the command center carrying a data pad with more detailed information about the emergency signal the beacon had transmitted. Everything it recorded before being destroyed, including energy weapon signatures that matched no known human technology. The attack had been swift and brutal, with the colony's defenses overwhelmed in the first few minutes of combat. Admiral Song-jae's hands shook as he activated the emergency communication system that would wake up every important leader in human space. President Nam Yuri answered the call from her private residence, still wearing her sleeping clothes, but instantly alert when she saw the Admiral's grave expression. The president had been in office for 12 years, but had never faced a crisis like this one. The emergency session of the Colonial Defense Council convened within 2 hours as government leaders arrived from around the world using high-speed transport ships. President Nam Yuri sat at the head of the massive conference table, while holographic displays showed the last known status of New Sol colony. General Park Tae studied the tactical data with growing anger as he realized what had happened to the peaceful farmers. Dr. Kang soon activated the xenobiology database, and began searching for information about the unknown attackers. The energy weapon signatures matched patterns used by a species, called the Velkari, who were known throughout the galaxy as raiders and slavers. Most civilized species avoided contact with them because they were too dangerous and unpredictable to negotiate with safely. The Velkari Empire controlled dozens of star systems populated by enslaved species who had been conquered over many centuries. Their military doctrine focused on quick, overwhelming attacks against targets that could not defend themselves effectively. They had never encountered human military forces in actual combat and probably assumed that all humans were as defenseless as the farming colonists. General Park Tay slammed his fist on the conference table as he read the intelligence reports about Velkari tactics. They specialized in attacking civilian populations and taking survivors as slaves while destroying everything else as a warning to other species. The general's face turned red with rage as he imagined what must have happened to the families in New Sol Colony president. Nam Yuri called for an immediate vote on military response options. The council members discussed different approaches ranging from diplomatic protests to full-scale military retaliation. Defense Minister Li Wan argued that a measured response would show human civilization was reasonable and peaceful. Foreign Minister Kim Hae disagreed, saying that weakness would only encourage more attacks on other colonies. Director Lim Young opened a sealed file that had been classified at the highest security levels for over 50 years. Inside was information about Protocol Dragon, a secret military program that had been developed after the last major interstellar war but never used. The protocol authorized unlimited military force against any species that attacked human civilian populations. The vote was unanimous. Every council member agreed that the Velkari attack could not go unanswered. Director Lim Young entered her authorization codes into the secure communication system and sent activation orders to military commanders across human space facilities that had been dormant for decades, began powering up weapons and ships that most people thought were just rumors. Admiral Cho Min received her orders while commanding the 7th Fleet during training exercises in the outer system. The 7th Fleet was humanity's most elite military force, composed of volunteers who had spent their entire careers preparing for the kind of war that everyone hoped would never come. Admiral Cho Min smiled grimly as she read her mission parameters because she had been waiting her whole life for this moment. The battleship Inchin's Fury was the flagship of the 7th Fleet and the most powerful warship ever built by human engineers. The ship was over 3 kilometers long and carried enough firepower to destroy entire planets if necessary. Captain Ryu Zhang had commanded the vessel for 8 years but had never fired its weapons in actual combat until now. Colonel Lao Oh-sung gathered his officers in the briefing room of the orbital assault carrier, where the 1st Orbital Drop Division was based. His soldiers were trained for the most dangerous missions in human space, including boarding enemy ships and capturing fortified positions. The colonel showed them pictures from New Sol Colony and watched their faces harden with determination as they realized what they would be fighting for. The intelligence division worked around the clock to locate every Velkari military installation and identify priority targets for immediate destruction. Spy satellites were redirected to monitor Velkari space while deep cover agents activated communication networks that had been dormant for years. Major Han Sol reviewed fighter squadron assignments, knowing that her pilots would soon face alien enemies in deadly combat. Meanwhile, in Velkari Space Fleet, Admiral Vorthak celebrated the successful attack on New Sol Colony. Commander Thexel reported that the human colony had been destroyed completely with minimal Velkari casualties. The few surviving humans were being transported to slave camps, where they would spend the rest of their lives working in mines and factories. The Velkari High Command believed they had found the perfect victims for their expansion plans. Humans appeared to be scattered across many star systems in small defenseless colonies, with no unified military command structure. Fleet Admiral Vorthak ordered Commander Thexel to identify 3 more human settlements for immediate attack, while other Velkari fleets prepared for a campaign of conquest. Commander Thexel studied star charts showing human colony locations and selected targets that appeared to have valuable resources and large civilian populations. The Velkari military machine began moving ships and troops into position for attacks that would enslave thousands more humans and establish Velkari dominance over an entire sector of space back on Earth. The final preparations were complete. Admiral Song Jae watched as the most powerful military force in human history prepared to leave Earth's solar system. The Seventh Fleet consisted of over 200 warships, including battleships, cruisers, destroyers, and specialized assault vessels that carried troops trained for planetary invasion. President Nam Yuri addressed the nation, explaining that human civilians had been attacked by alien raiders and that a military response was necessary to protect other colonies from similar attacks. She did not mention the true scale of the force being deployed because that information was classified at the highest levels. The dragons were awakening, and soon the Valkyrie would learn that attacking peaceful farmers had been the worst mistake in their species' history. 3 days after the attack on New Sol Colony, Valkyrie patrol ships detected massive energy signatures approaching through hyperspace. The readings were unlike anything in their databases, showing power levels that seemed impossible for ships of the sizes their sensors indicated. Lieutenant Kekstar reported the anomalies to his commanding officer, but was told to ignore what were probably just sensor malfunctions. Commander Thexel was planning his next attack on a human farming colony when the hyperspace distortions became too large to ignore. The Valkyrie fleet sensors screamed warnings as something enormous was about to emerge from the jump point directly in front of their position. The commander ordered battle stations, but nothing could have prepared his forces for what came next. The human Seventh Fleet materialized from hyperspace like avenging ghosts rising from the depths of space. The lead vessel was the battleship Inchen's Fury, which dwarfed the largest Valkyrie ships and bristled with weapon systems that glowed with deadly energy. Admiral Cho Min stood on the bridge of her flagship, watching the alien fleet scramble to respond to her arrival. The Valkyrie ships looked like toys compared to the human warships that continued emerging from hyperspace in perfect formation. Cruisers, destroyers, and assault carriers took their positions while fighter squadrons launched from the larger vessels, creating a cloud of small, deadly ships that moved with precision the aliens had never witnessed before. Captain Ryu Zhang received permission to engage the enemy and smiled as he activated the Incheon's Fury's primary weapons. The battleship's main guns fired quantum disruptor beams that passed through Valkyrie shields as if they were made of paper. The first alien cruiser exploded in a ball of fire that lit up the darkness of space like a small sun commander. Thexel watched in horror as his fleet's defensive formations crumbled under the human attack. Valkyrie energy weapons that could destroy cities barely scratched the armor of the human ships, while the aliens' proud warships were being torn apart by weapons technology they had never seen before. The battle was not going according to any plan. In Valkyrie military doctrine, Major Han Sol led her fighter squadron in a devastating attack on Valkyrie escort ships. Her pilots moved through the enemy formation like dancers performing a deadly ballet. Each human fighter was faster and more maneuverable than anything the Valkyrie had ever faced, and their weapons could penetrate alien shields with ease. The Valkyrie tried to retreat, but discovered that the human fleet had surrounded them completely. Admiral Cho Min had anticipated their escape routes and positioned her ships to cut off every possible avenue of withdrawal. The aliens who had attacked defenseless farmers now found themselves trapped with no way to run from the consequences of their actions. Valkyrie Station Beta 7 was the nearest military outpost to the battle, and its commander, Fleet Captain Morthek, received desperate calls for reinforcement from Commander Thexel. The station's defenses included orbital weapons platforms and a garrison of elite Valkyrie Marines who had never been defeated in battle. Fleet Captain Morthek was confident his forces could handle whatever the humans might send against them. Colonel Oh Sung commanded the 1st Orbital Drop Division as their assault ships approached the Valkyrie station. His soldiers had trained for this type of mission their entire careers, but this would be their first real combat against alien enemies. The colonel looked at his troops and saw determination in their eyes as they prepared to avenge the innocent families killed at New Sol Colony. The human assault began with a coordinated strike that destroyed the station's defensive weapons. In the first 30 seconds, Captain Kuan Yeon led her Marines in boarding pods that punched through the station's hull like bullets through tissue paper. The Valkyrie defenders had expected a conventional attack but were completely unprepared for human boarding tactics. Valkyrie Marines were trained to fight other species that used similar weapons and tactics, but humans fought with a controlled fury that terrified the alien defenders. The human soldiers moved through the station corridors like unstoppable forces of nature, using weapons that could cut through Velkhari armor and tactics that seemed impossible. To counter, Fleet Captain Morthek barricaded himself in the command center and watched his security cameras show human Marines systematically clearing every section of his station. The Velkhari soldiers, who had terrorized dozens of weaker species, were running in panic from enemies who showed no mercy to those who had murdered innocent civilians. The battle for Velkhari Station, Beta 7, lasted exactly 18 minutes from start to finish. Human forces captured the facility with minimal casualties, while the entire Velkhari garrison was either dead or surrendering. The aliens, who had seemed so powerful when attacking farmers, proved to be no match for trained human soldiers. News of the devastating defeat spread quickly through Velkhari. Communication networks. Fleet Admiral Vorthak could not believe the initial reports until he saw the wreckage himself through long-range sensors. Entire battle groups had been destroyed, and one of their most secure military installations had fallen to human forces. The Velkhari Military Command held an emergency meeting to discuss their response to the human attack. Intelligence officers reported that the enemy ships used unknown technology that made their shields and weapons ineffective. The humans had also demonstrated boarding tactics that no Velkhari commander knew how to counter. Commander Thexel was brought before Fleet Admiral Vorthak in chains after being captured during the battle. The officer who had proudly reported the destruction of New Sol Colony now trembled as he described the terrifying efficiency of human military forces. His fleet had been annihilated, and he had barely escaped with his life fleet. Admiral Vorthak realized that the Velkhari Empire faced an enemy unlike any they had encountered before. The humans were not weak farmers, but a species with advanced military technology and soldiers trained for the kind of warfare that the Velkhari could not match. The admiral began to understand that his empire might be in serious danger. Other Velkhari commanders reported similar encounters with human forces across their territory. Mining stations were being destroyed, supply convoys were disappearing, and rescue ships sent to investigate were never heard from again. The humans seemed to be everywhere at once, striking without warning and vanishing before reinforcements could arrive. The psychological impact of the defeats was spreading through Velkhari ranks, faster than the actual military losses. Soldiers, who had once terrorized civilian populations, now jumped at shadows, expecting human attackers to appear from nowhere. Warriors who had built their reputation on crushing weaker species found themselves facing an enemy that was stronger, faster, and more ruthless than anything in their experience. Deep in Velkhari space, emergency meetings were being held as the Empire's leadership tried to understand what had happened to their invincible military. The species that had built their power on fear and intimidation now found themselves the ones who were afraid the dragons had awakened, and the Velkhari were beginning to realize that they had made a terrible mistake when they attacked those peaceful farmers at New Sol Colony.